He advises companies across the country on a broad range of domestic and international economic issues. Joel's name may be already familiar to you, and he is often quoted in national press, including Business Week, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, USA Today, Financial Times, and Newsweek. You may have seen him on television appearances, on shows like ABC's The World News Tonight or Money Matters Today, or heard him providing business commentary on KYW. He is also the recipient of numerous awards. In 2007 and 2011, he received the National Association of Business Economists Outlook Award as the top economic forecaster. In 2008, he was awarded the Lawrence Klein Award for Blue Chip Forecasting Excellence, one of the oldest and most prestigious forecasting honors. That same year, he was named the Bloomberg Business News top economic forecaster. And in 2006, he was MSNBC's top forecaster. He was also the first independent economist to win the CBS Market Watch Economist of the Month. Just this April, Big Picture Economics, How to Navigate the New Global Economy, was published, a book that Joel co-authored. The book, written for everyone, provides a roadmap for decoding the mysteries of tumultuous economy. It helps people put the pieces together and form frameworks for future decision-making.
Basically, last year when we had this, I was really, pretty optimistic about where the economy was going. And for a long period of time, I seemed to have that forecast really, really locked. I was looking for growth to pick up. I was looking for the unemployment rate to come down. I was really looking for a broadening of the economic expansion, which had hardly at all hit its stride. When it came to the Lancaster area, I was pretty optimistic about it as well. And there were a number of factors that I expressed. Well, on the Lancaster area, I think I hit it pretty decently, and I'll talk about the local economy in a little while. But I'll admit, I'll be the first one to admit, I didn't quite get it right when it came to the national economy. I made the single worst forecasting error you could make. It's something every economic forecaster knows not to do. I failed to assume we would have the most gruesome winter we have ever had. I mean, who could have forecasted that? If you take a look at the economy through last summer and into last fall, things weren't really coming around. Job growth was picking up. Home construction was really beginning to accelerate. Housing prices across the country were starting to rise and rise at an ever faster pace. Unemployment rates were coming down. It just seemed that this recovery that was taking a gruesome amount of time was finally coming to the point where we could all say, hey, we're back into good, solid, if not strong growth. But then we had the winter. And as we all know, it just knocked the underpinnings out of the economy. And indeed, first quarter growth was -1%. And it's going to be revised. It might even be revised down to as little as -1.5%. Yet there's nobody out there saying, oh my, this economy is declining. Are we going back into recession? And you would think that with economic growth that weak, there'd be people out there saying, do we have a real problem? But that's not the case. The reason, very simply, is that the winter caused housing starts to disappear. So the question economists had is, was that just a pause because of, Mother Nature got really ticked off? Or was it something more fundamental? And we've had, for example, 3 consecutive months of job gains of 200,000 or more. We haven't seen that in 7 years. We're averaging job growth levels that really indicate that the unemployment rate is going to come down even further. And we're already down to 6.3%, and that's still way too high. But when you consider that full employment is about 5.5%, we're making real progress. Motor vehicle sales. A year ago, we were in 15.5 million units annualized. And I think I commented that that was really good, and I thought that by the end of the year, we could be moving towards the upper 15 million. And that selling rate of somewhere around 16 to 16.5 was solid. Well, the last selling rate we got was 16.9 million. The vehicle sector is back. We have really decided to buy vehicles again. And those home sales that disappeared, well, they haven't come back really strongly. They too are filtering upward. So if you look at the economic numbers, we had -1.5% in the first quarter. I wouldn't be surprised if the current quarter, the second quarter that we're in, has growth of 4% or even more. Some housing starts, they were down to some extent in May from April, but when you look at the housing start numbers for the first 2 months of the year, the first 2 months of this quarter compared to the first quarter of the year, they're rising at a double-digit pace. Housing, which hurt the economy in the first quarter, is going to be adding to growth in the first quarter. These are the kinds of things that are going on that says to me, you can't fight Mother Nature, but if you just let her calm down, let her take it easy, you can get back to operating more normally. That the labor market is beginning to tighten. And I'll tell you why, because I think it's critical. It's also a message that I'm giving to the business community, because I don't think a lot of people are thinking in this way. Now, if you're not thinking in this way, it doesn't mean you're wrong. Just because I'm saying it doesn't make it right. It's just that I'm saying it, and I'm never wrong. So the idea that there's always people coming into the labor force, always people losing jobs that have to look for work, and it takes them a while to find jobs. It's a lot of people that quit their jobs and have to look for new jobs. It's a fact that one region may be growing faster than another, so they may have problems hiring in one area, but there's a lot of labor in another area which is growing more slowly. And people can't necessarily pick up and just move. Indeed, one of the biggest problems that housing has caused for the economy is that if your house is underwater, right, it's pretty hard to move to another part of the country because you'd have to come up with cash in order to sell it. That there's always going to be a fair number of people who are unemployed at any given time. You get a large number of applications in the first 30 seconds that it's out posted. And you get dozens of fully qualified people. If you get one opening, 20, 25, 30 qualified people, you can basically set the wage you want. Why? Because if the first person doesn't want it, and the second person doesn't want it, or the fifth person doesn't want it, you still have 20 to 25 people that will maintain it. And eventually you find that you will get a fully qualified person willing to take the salary that you want. So you don't have to change your pay scale. As far as retention goes, where are your people going? If job growth is weak and the unemployment rate is high, you can always replace them, and they know it's going to be hard to find another job. I say the labor market is strong. So there's Joel Naroff on this side, and the vast numbers of savants on the other side. All these other talking heads and people. So who's right? And as I said before, me. And I'll explain to you why I think I'm right and they're wrong. I want you to understand what the labor force participation rate is. What you really need to understand is, why is it going down? The assumption is it's because people are leaving the labor force. Well, that's actually true. That's definitional. If there's fewer people of those ages in there, then the ratio is going to go down. But why are those people leaving? Is this something due to the economy, or is there something at work? Because that's the most critical thing. 65 years, the male labor force participation rate. It's not been going down in the last. If something's been going in one direction for 65 years, it tends to be a trend. The female labor force participation rate is also going down. 14 years. April of 2000, been going in a direction for 14 years. It's a good assumption it is a trend, right? So you have long-term trends in the labor force participation rate. One of the biggest reasons why that's happening, does anybody want to guess, is baby boomers. The reason the labor force participation rate skyrocketed, it started to rise in the late 60s, really accelerated in the 70s, and then began to tail off, but kept rising in the 80s and 90s, and peaked in 2000. What went on during that period of time? The baby boomers, think about it, the baby boomers started coming into the workforce, and there was a vastly different psychology on the part especially of women, because remember, that's when the labor force participation rate really began to skyrocket, and it was due to baby boomers getting out of high school, getting out of college, getting out of graduate school, getting out of medical school, getting their MBAs or whatever it is, and suddenly all those women were going into school, coming out, and taking jobs. A vastly different system. Now that the boomers, and we're now turning 65 at the rate of roughly 10,000 a day. Teenagers. They're the ones who have been, they're using the last in, first out. It's tough for them to find jobs. They're not getting jobs. A lot of them have just given up even trying to find part-time jobs. This decline in the labor force participation rate has some element to do with the slow recovery, but mostly due to demographics. And therefore, the 6.3% is real. And the closer you get to full employment, what happens? Well, when we get to 5.8, 5.7, and you put that ad in Monster.com, you don't have 120 qualified workers. You might have 10 or 12 qualified workers. Now, if the first person doesn't take it, or the second person doesn't take it, your job offer, now you've got an issue. You're running into a situation where your pool of qualified workers isn't so great that you can be as picky as you had been. And when that gets pretty close to full employment, and you're looking at 2, 3, 4, 5, now you can't be picky. Now you can't risk that you lose those 2, 3, 4, or 5 workers. You have to make sure you do what? You make them an offer they can't refuse. Why? Because the reason we have such a sluggish expansion isn't because the government is screwed up. The government is screwed up, but that's not the problem. It isn't because the Fed policies have failed. I don't know whether they've been successful or failures or not. It's the simple fact that the business community has taken, has done what they should do. They've kept compensation costs under control so that they can maximize their earnings. We're in business for business. We're in business to make money. Altruism is nice. We need to be part of the community. But when it comes to our workers, we need to control our biggest expense, which is labor, and we've done that. Today we got real earnings. Do you know that the average real earnings is earnings adjusted for inflation? So if you got a 2% increase, inflation went up 2%, your purchasing power is basically flat, right? We have an economy that's 70% dependent on consumer spending. If consumer purchasing power is going nowhere, how can you expect the economy to go anywhere? You really can't. So we're in this kind of, the economy's in this trap, that businesses are doing what businesses are supposed to do, keep control over wages and benefits. But by keeping control over wages and benefits, they're keeping control over spending power. By keeping control over spending power, they're limiting the growth of consumption. By limiting the growth of consumption, they're limiting the growth of the economy. And wages start bidding up. Now workers have more income. Add that to all the new workers who are getting jobs. You see there's a lot more income out there. They start spending it. Demand goes up. When demand goes up, businesses' sales go up. They need to produce more. They need to hire more. And suddenly that cycle, which is held down by low wages, turns dramatically and growth goes a lot faster. Now the second punishment we get, though, as at least not necessarily for you, Commissioner, but for most of the rest of the people out there, is that if the economy grows more quickly, what do you think happens to interest rates? They got to start rising. So while we're not at the days of low interest rates, you can see that 6 months from now, when the unemployment rate is below 6% and headed towards 5.5%, and wages begin to start to rise a little bit faster, and the markets start recognizing this economy starting to come around, then interest rates are going to rise. Once the wages start rising, then the Fed, which is most focusing on the labor markets, is going to say, okay, the economy's getting better, we don't have to keep rates so low. 0% Fed funds rate is not a long-term normal rate. I sometimes have to break that news to banks. The rest of us, I think we all understand. Which means the Fed will start raising rates. That may not happen till the first 3, 4, 5 months of next year. But again, if you're looking out into the future, you've got to consider, if I'm making plans, if I'm considering expanding, and I'm worried about the cost of money, you may not have to worry about it today, but a year from now, the cost of money is probably going to be a lot different. Talked about, first of all, is the idea of next day delivery on the internet. I don't know if any of you remember I discussed that. And what did I say? I said that means warehousing becomes really, really critical for retailers. All right? Which means that any area that has good, available land close to transportation networks that can get you north and south and east and west are going to do phenomenally well. Second thing I talked about, and this is an issue that here, you're facing it, Commissioner, in Lebanon County. We're going to face it across all of the state, is that we have some of the richest natural gas formations in the country. North Dakota may have oil. We have natural gas. Pennsylvania is the fastest growing production state for natural gas in the country. We are expanding it faster. We're third, we're going to be second. We are just blowing it out. The problem is, it's not a problem, it's not a problem in the long run. In the short run, the problem is it's nice to have gas in Marcellus shale areas. You got to use it, which means you got to transport it, which means you got to have pipelines. You're not putting in a lot of trucks for all that natural gas. It just doesn't work particularly well. And I think, the last thing everybody wants is 10-mile long natural gas railroads. You probably couldn't do that anyway. So what you're doing is dealing with the reality that if we're going to make use of a resource that could create for Pennsylvania maybe the lowest energy cost state in the country, if we use it right, we're going to have to create the mechanism to get it used here. Because we have the supply here, it's low cost, we need to do it. That has not been done yet. It's really something that has been a problem with the state. They haven't gotten their arms around how you develop it, not just to have natural gas wells, but to have natural gas usage and use it to attract businesses. But I write a column for the Sunday Inquirer talking about that specific area. Basically, I ended with a challenge. If you like Keystone XL, I don't want to hear you don't want a pipeline coming through your backyard. But it has costs. It has real costs. And we're going to have to start dealing with those kinds of things. But two of the biggest trends, energy, okay, and next day delivery, which I talked about last year, are only building up, which says to me that this area is going to do well. Yes.
I hope this isn't too political, but we hear a lot about the budget for the state right now. So is Governor Corbett crying wolf over his dilemma?
Okay, the question is, not to sound political, is the governor crying wolf over the budget deficit? The answer is no. I mean, let's face it. The state is running at least $1.2 to $1.5 billion budget deficit. And that ultimately becomes a political issue. Economists, when it comes to how you resolve a budget deficit, the job of an economist is not to say whether you should cut spending or which programs to cut, or you should increase taxes and which taxes to increase. Our job is to say, if you did this, this is what happens. A wide range of options. Which he chooses is a political decision that has economic implications. So how he resolves that will largely determine the direction of the state's economy. But there, because if he stays away from taxes, it means it has to come from cuts. If it comes from cuts, who is he cutting? I mean, you can just take the example of New Jersey, where they had opted to reduce the amount of money that would go into their underfunded pension plans, and they, were immediately downgraded by the bond agencies because they were supposed to be doing something to resolve the problem and they weren't. So the bond agencies lowered their ratings, which increases their interest costs. There's no such thing as a free rate of the pension plan. If you don't do that and it's underfunded, you're going to get it one way or another. Somebody has to pay. But there is a real budget deficit. That's not a question. The question is how it gets resolved and what do we do to grow the economy going forward. And the two, to some extent, are interrelated. But what we should do is a political decision. I can tell you what happens, but economists try and stay neutral. Otherwise, we're viewed as being political. Okay?